and welcome to another edition of the Big Nick Energy Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Yoke. Got Brad Dressler, my co-host, right there. And today we have a very special guest, DJ Bass. He's an NBA agent and founder of RBA Showcase, located in Manhattan. Notable current clients include Norvel, Pelle, once a Knick, always a Knick.
Let's go.
Terry Taylor of the Indiana Pacers, and Tariq Owens, who had a two-way contract with the Phoenix Suns, who now plays in Italy. BJ, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Fantastic. Brad, how you doing?
Late night, as mentioned. Ugly loss. Ugly loss. But, defending world champions really can't complain too much,
Going 2-1 on a road trip and taking the first loss for both teams that were undefeated prior at home is awesome.
Right.
So BJ, just to give the listeners a quick synopsis of who you are, how did you become a basketball players and sports agent?
Oh my God. I'll make a very long story short, but I'm a Long Island guy. I grew up in Roslyn on Long Island, and about 2008, 2009, there was a kid here named George Beeman, and he I don't know how closely you guys follow New York City College, but George played at Manhattan. He was a kid that, long story short, wasn't getting a D1 scholarship, and he went to my high school, and I live here now. I went here and I moved back here, and married
Nice.
my high school sweetheart. Yeah, so I'm a Roslyn guy through and through. In fact, my kids are at Roslyn High School now. So I saw George playing, and I knew he was a D1 guy, and I basically just helped him get a scholarship at Manhattan. I took him to Hofstra. I took him, all around. And Barry Rorson, who you guys probably know. Actually, Barry worked for the Knicks for a while. He was scouting for the Knicks. Barry was a coach in Manhattan. He was assistant coach for Calipari at Kentucky for a while. He was with Jamie Dixon at Pitt, and he brought a lot of the New York City guys to Pitt. But anyway, Barry gave George a scholarship, and the rest kind of was history from there. George, I remember talking to Tom Kinchalski, who was recently passed away, the legendary New York high school scout, and he was telling me George is a D3 guy, and I'm like, Tom, I don't know, man. And so George ends up going to Manhattan, scores 2,000 points, takes him to the NCAA tournament.
That's
and
awesome.
From there, yeah, it was awesome. And that's where I sort of figured out that my scouting eye was accurate enough, and it wasn't about money for me. It was about helping a kid from my neighborhood and getting in. And I followed George, and then shortly thereafter, some guys from my neighborhood that I grew up with, the Rubensteins, had invested in Basketball City, which you guys probably know was at the west side of Chelsea Piers, and then they opened up this incredible place by South Street Seaport. So they said, hey, we just took an investment in this place. Would you want to start an agency? And, we heard what you did for George, and that's amazing, blah, blah, blah. I was like, are you
It's a giant leap.
It was so, I think the moral of the story is, for you never know who's watching, right? Like George, I wasn't in the business. I was just like a guy. I played at Roslyn. I was a big hoops guy. Had some friends in the industry.
Yep.
But I helped George, and then the Rubensteins heard what I did for George, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to start an agency?" And within 6 months, I had a kid, Vernon Goodridge, with the Warriors, as a matter of fact. So it the whole thing was a crazy story how I got in. And then it just happened really fast. And since then, we've been building and, growing organically, using the G League a lot before a lot of people did. We were on that. So, it's been good. I mean, listen, we're still in business 15 years later.
That's all you can ask
That's
for.
awesome. Yeah.
Keeping the business going is all you can really do. Speaking of, I'm glad you mentioned the G League, because my next question actually for you was that you saw an opportunity to use the NBA, what was the D League, which is now called the G League, as a way to push forward your career.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst behind that idea, and how long did it take until that vision became more of an executable plan?
We had guys that were really talented, but they didn't have the resume. And Europe and international basketball is all about your resume. They're very, very risk averse. So they're going to go with what's on paper, as opposed to, hey, I see this guy can play, but I can't go to my GM and take a guy that didn't play high major, whatever, because I'll risk losing my job. I'm on a 1-year contract. So we saw the D League at the time, the NBA D League, as a way. We knew it was going to grow. We knew the NBA was behind it. We knew they had a ton of resources, and they were serious about integrating to the point where each team now has a one-to-one affiliate, where they're actually developing within their own system, the coaching staff, the players, and they were going to be regionally close, so that I think like Sioux Falls in Miami is the one that's like the farthest away still. But like everybody else, Knicks are up in Westchester, Nets are on Long Island, like everybody's right there. So we just felt that it was a great way that we had guys that had NBA ability but didn't have NBA resumes.
Right.
And what better way to prove that they were legitimate NBA prospects? And then at the same time, if they didn't make it, now that they've played in the G League and they average 15 a game or whatever, now they can go overseas and not go to the middle of nowhere, for $1,000 a month. They could actually go and make a living out of it. So we used it for guys to get them up, but we also used it to build guys up and get them over.
I love that. That's awesome. What's the overall process of actually like pitching a player on representing them, and then to follow that up with, because I figured there's like two different ways to pitch someone based on them being like 17 or 18 versus 23, 24, fifth year senior kind of guy.
Yeah.
So how does that process go when you're actually trying to represent somebody?
I mean, we're just honest, and like we lose guys because of that. Like, bro, you're not getting drafted. Like, I mean, you might, but like, look at the draft board. A lot of guys don't want to hear that, but some do. Some are like, man, these guys are so real, like, and that's just who we are and how we approach things. Like, you need to be prepared. I'm big about setting expectations. Like, once you don't get drafted, okay, then what happens, right? Here's what's going to happen. There's going to be 5 or 6 teams that are going to call. They're going to offer summer league. We're going to have to look at the roster makeup. We're going to have to look at what they offer. Do they offer a two-way? Do they offer an Exhibit 10? If you're not talking about a lottery guy and you're not talking about somebody that's, comfortably in that, early second round, everything's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is stashes. A lot of it is Euro stashes at the very end. So like, we're just realistic, and we believe in being honest and setting the right expectations of what's really going to happen. And then what happens with a lot of guys that get bullshitted is they come back to us and they're like, hey, this guy told me X, Y, and Z. It didn't happen. And the relationship's already done, So we just, like I said, we lose some guys because a lot of guys are used to hearing what they want and not what they need. But I just take that approach. I think that's the best way to approach it, to give the guys honest advisory service based on where they are in the marketplace, who likes them, who doesn't, what the strengths and weaknesses are perceived, and what they need to work on. And a lot of times that starts with the G League. I mean, look at the guys. I thought I said Johnny Davis last night playing in the G League so he's a top 10 kid, top 11, whatever.
Yep.
So like, it's a fact of life. Like, you're going to touch the G League, and a lot of like, that was like a no-fly zone. Guys did not want to hear about that years ago. Now it's more embraced, and guys are starting to understand because they've seen all these guys go down, and they understand that it's like a layered process for making it and sticking it. If you're a lottery pick, then you know where you are. But everybody else has got to kind of fight through that current, and it's a gauntlet, man. I'm telling you, it's a serious gauntlet.
The NBA is the hardest league to get into in America because there's only 15 players on an active roster, and every other sport has 25 plus. So that does make it really difficult. It would make sense that a lot of players don't want to handle the truth behind that, which on your end is a very New York thing, by the way, to just let them know how it is. If you like it, you like it. If you can't handle it, you can't handle it. The last question I have, and then Brad's going to take over after this. How much does the conversation differ talking to a 17 or 18-year-old versus a person in the early to mid-20s?
Yeah, good question. I think the guys that are a little bit older already have an experience where, like I said, things didn't go the way they were promised, and they already come to us like with that understanding. I think a lot of the younger guys, I think, honestly, it's not a great business. It's not a great business because the return on investment is really not there. You're going to have to pay for training and things like that. And it's all above board. I'm just like, and look, there's stuff that's below the board that goes on. We don't mess with that. We're not trying to get the lottery picks. We're trying to grow organically. But like, that stuff goes on, and then there's certain expectations, but generally, you're paying for training, you're paying for logistics. There's no guarantees a kid's going to stay with you. And then, like I said, when the 17, 18-year-old, when it doesn't work out for them, they're just going to change directions. They're just they're not going to look inward. They're not going to take accountability. They're just going to say, "Oh, my agent didn't get it done." No, you just missed shots, bro. Like, like that's all. But
Facts of life, man.
yeah, if you go in and guess what? If you make shots, they don't take you off the court. I have news for you.
That's so funny. Brad, the floor is yours from here on.
Yeah, you know, this whole time I've been staring at that Norvel Pelle jersey. Like, I remember exactly where I was, and I'm sure BJ, you know exactly what it is that I'm referring to. When he had that, it's awesome. I love it. It's just
the
so
game
awesome.
worn. Yeah.
I remember where I was when we were playing Detroit. I know you know this game. We were playing Detroit, where he had that huge block during COVID.
Yeah.
He had that huge block, finger pops out, pops it right back in, comes in, gets another huge block. That was just like my favorite Norvel Pelle moment. And I was just like, man, I really hope we keep this kid around. Or at the very least, just he hangs around for a little bit, because that kid's got talent. But yeah, man. So seeing how we now have a an agent turned executive with the Knicks now, well, first and foremost, I mean, do you have any interest or just general intrigue in maybe seeing if you have like a front office future anywhere along the timeline?
It's a great question. I think anybody would, like, who wouldn't want to be involved in something like that, right? And in fact, I did meet years ago when Glenn was here, and Glenn was an amazing guy. And Glenn and Don, and Leon is too, by the way. That's not to say that these guys are not good guys, but Glenn and Donnie were really good to me because it was early on, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I tended to maybe overhype my guys a little bit because I believed in them. But like that's and I needed to get attention, but they were amazing to me. And I remember meeting with Glenn and having some conversations, nothing crazy and nothing like, like I'm ready to come aboard. But he was asking me some of the same things. And what was amazing was that I left the office and I'm like, man, what if that's an opportunity to go work for the Knicks? But I have this agency, and it's, I'd have to put it aside. It's like your baby, you've cultivated it and everything. And then Glenn got fired like a month later after winning 55 games with Woodson that year. And it was like, man, imagine that I did that. Like, not that it was happening, but imagine that it did. And then I left my agency that I had been working on at that point, like 5-6 years.
Right.
And then Glenn gets blown out after a 55-win season, and the whole new regime comes in. And now I've come in there, and now I'm out also. And like, I never even got a shot. Like, so it just showed me like how tenuous it could be.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I'd rather have more control over, my stability. And so of course I would want to do it. And I think it'd be an incredible challenge. And look, there are things that I grew up on Long Island. Like, I'm a Knick guy. I that's what I grew up with. I grew up with Ewing. I grew up with, even before that, I grew up with Bernard King and Eddie Lee Wilkins and Rory Sparrow and, Johnny Newman and those guys. Like, that was my first thing. So I'm bleeding this stuff too. And there's things that I have seen over the years that they could do differently. They certainly missed on some draft picks, right? And that's not to knock anybody or say, like, a lot of people miss on draft picks, but like, there's things that you see as a fan that, if they just did this a little different, if they, the other thing they got to deal with, Westchester's tough. Like, guys don't like to come into, they don't want to drive up there. Like, so there's issues that they can fix. And so to answer your question, yes, I always think about it, and I think about what could they be doing differently to help them get on the right track and stay there.
Hey, well, here's your chance. I want you to take off the Nike hat and put on the front office executive hat really quickly, just because we're fully aware that you have a finger on the pulse of the NBA a little bit. So the Knicks have kind of looked like a mess in some of their games, and losing in blowout fashion a few times, namely against the Nets, against the Hawks. So only really beating teams that are either without a star or their star is injured, and so on and so forth, right? How would you have maybe approached this past offseason differently if you were in charge?
Great question. I mean, look, they did a really nice job with Brunson, obviously, and he's
Yep.
a really good player. I don't know the particulars of the Mitchell trade. Would I have loved to get Mitchell in here? Yes. Would I have given up RJ? I'm not sure. Okay, so those are, to me, those are the two biggest sort of pillars of what happened and didn't happen, right? RJ, I said this a couple times. I like Twitter Spaces a lot, and I jump on there to hear, well, Brad.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a great way to get the pulse, like you said. You want to keep the but that's where I really get it. Like, you don't get it by watching Alan Hahn. I love Alan Hahn, but like Wally and Alan, they're great guys, but like you don't really get what people are thinking and feeling. So I usually dip in there to get a taste of everything, and hear what's going on. Look, bigger than that tactical stuff this year, when you go back, you have to hit on draft picks. So if you talk about SGA, if you talk about Mitchell the first time around, if you talk about Halliburton, who I pounded the table, like I loved Halliburton. And here we didn't have a point guard for how many years? And Brunson and Halliburton are two very different type of point guards. Okay. Yeah. And that's the guy that I wanted them to take. And I think I went on a couple spots and I said it at the time. You have to hit the draft picks. You can't blow 3 or 4 years of draft picks and expect to. That's how you get leapfrogged by the New Orleans and the whoever that are hitting year after year, and hitting on the Herb Jones and the Trey Murphys. All of a sudden, they're now loaded, and we're still figuring it out. So there's the organic draft piece, which you have to hit right, and then there's sort of the free agency piece and how do you put the pieces together? And I think right now, like everybody sees, there's a lot of sort of overlap and redundancy between Brunson and RJ and Randall. And then, I don't want to say it's a conflict, but you have a veteran coach and you have, it seems like some youth that,
relatively young roster,
should be being developed more. So like, it doesn't seem to be as cohesive as it could. And that's something that, like, you would hope that Leon could come in and sort of get that all in order. And I think they're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Being that you and Leon are both agents by trade, 3 off seasons, and he's been with the team pretty much 3 years now, going on 3 years, come January, right? How would you say he's made, like, what are your thoughts on the transition he's made from agent to front office executive? Like, if you had to give it like an overall grade and like just a general definition.
I think that like the jury's still out, right? I mean, we got to see what they do. I mean, look, I think the East is really tough. I mean, it's so almost like shifted to where like, and I don't even think teams are playing as well as they will yet. Like Milwaukee hasn't really hit their stride yet. Phillies, hasn't had Harden yet, really. Yeah. Lost Maxey last night. Toronto's still good, but they haven't had Siakam, so and Van Vliet's been out. So like, but like when you look at Milwaukee, and I said this before the season, Atlanta, I'm missing a couple. I mean, Charlotte's kind of falling back, and Detroit looks like they're falling back. Cade is hurt.
Washington doesn't look terrible.
Washington's, and that's another one. They like they're keeping it together. You can see what you may not love everything Washington does, but it looks like everything's sort of cohesive now.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do with Beal, and we'll see. But the point is, there's 6 or 7 teams that are legitimately ahead of the Knicks, and it's a tough spot to be in because it's that same conversation we always had. You're in no man's land. Like you're not in the lottery. You're going to get a huge game changer. You're not in a point where you can challenge to get into the top 4. And if they get it right, it's amazing. I was there for one of the Atlanta games like 2 years ago in the playoffs, and like the place was awesome. And we all, like, when I grew up in Ewing and the Bulls and the Pacers and everybody, I mean, it would be bananas. And like, I don't know if it could ever be like that again, because I think things are just different now. Like, I don't know if sports is really the same, but like, if they ever got it right, it'd be amazing. And like I said, I think the jury's still out with Leon, and on the court, my biggest thing, and I said this before the season, I want the ball in RJ's hands. I don't need RJ shooting 20 shots a game. I loved him at Duke being a playmaker and finding Zion and finding my man Reddish. And that's where I think that RJ's best dynamic value is. Are they going to play like that? Are they going to coach like that? I don't know. But if you threw me in right now and said, figure this out on the court, I want the ball like Brunson has it. Sometimes there's a little too much, dribbling. The ball stops a little bit. He's great. But like if you want to flow and you want RJ in because the defensive switchability and all that stuff, then put the ball in his hands a little bit and let him play make. Don't look to him for 20 shots. Like that's a thing that I think they could do now. Will they do it? Probably not,
Yeah. I mean, you're right. That was RJ's kind of cup of tea back in college, but I feel like his playmaking has kind of fallen off a cliff at the NBA level. For now, for the time being, I personally don't think I want the ball in his hands too much, especially with a point guard like Jalen Brunson, but I could agree with you where I'd like to see the ball in his hands a little bit more,
It's the most dynamic thing. When I coach a team or I look at a team, how can I create something dynamic that the other team might not be able to match up with? Right. And that's like, again, I agree with you. They haven't done it. So they're not just going to throw him out there in the pick and roll 10 times a game. But you know what? They should call it some. They should find somebody that can, because he can get to the rim. He can make floaters in the paint. He can see the floor. He can throw a lob. And when you have two bigs running in the pick and roll and you have to concentrate the defense in there, it also balances the floor and opens up the rest of the floor, right, as opposed to the probing and just sort of, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I would love to see more of it and then see what happens.
Yeah, a lot of people, particularly on Twitter, do believe that we have guys like Julius Randle that are kind of preventing RJ from reaching his pinnacle, and that could be true. I've been one to say that you could argue back and forth about Obi Toppin versus Tyrese Halliburton. It's surprising to me where you had a CAA guy that was available in Tyrese Halliburton and we didn't make a trade for him. I guess that had a lot more to do with Leon wanting his godson in Jalen Brunson as opposed to giving up assets for a guy like Hallie, even though he kind of fits the timeline a little bit better. Neither here nor there. We could argue all day about the Obi Toppin versus Tyrese Halliburton thing that you were mentioning before. Who would have been a better pick at that point? If you went with Obi Toppin, because as you know, Obi was getting legitimate looks at number 1 overall that year for a little bit.
Yeah, he was.
But then LaMelo kind of obviously surpassed him and all these other guys. Hey, listen, he's still a hell of a lot better than Isaac Okoro. That I'll tell you that much. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that I think that once you made that draft pick for Obi Toppin, no matter how good Julius Randle is playing, I understand Julius was playing out of his mind at all NBA caliber. At that point, that was when I think the Knicks should have continued to stay the course. I mean, if one of your better players is a power forward and strictly a power forward in Julius Randle, and you go ahead and draft another guy, you would have to imagine that the next step is to trade the older guy and usher in the next guy. Like if you look at any other NBA situation ever, take all the bells and whistles away from the scenario. If you draft a guy 3rd overall in 2019 and then 8th overall in 2020, wouldn't you imagine that those two guys would be starting together and those are two of your core pieces that you want to build around? What have the Knicks done? You can't get Obi on the floor more than 17 minutes a game. It's he's learning how to shoot a lot better and so on and so forth. There's so many things to your point. Like I feel like the Knicks just aren't making the right choices when given those opportunities. And I feel like in 2020, once Leon came in, he should have just stuck with the rebuild and traded Julius at his highest value, which would have been the trade deadline in 2020, 2021, right? And he just did it. And it's understandable for him not to. He pivoted really well, got a Kemba Walker, got a Evan Fournier. That unfortunately didn't work out. So now we are, right? So it is what it is.
Well, look, I this is not Monday morning quarterbacking. Last
Right.
year, I said that Rose. Last year, when Kemba came in with Rose, I was like, well, health, health. That's your. Yeah, they're great, but they're not Kemba from UConn and D Rose from Memphis. They're not the same guys, and then this year there was some talk. I think I jumped into space maybe with you guys, and somebody was talking about Obi, or if you had to trade Obi or Grimes, which prospect would you had the higher ceiling that you would hold on to? And I said Obi. I mean, I wasn't like a slam dunk call, but it was like Grimes a nice player, and he had a great summer league, and like I know I could see what he is, and like, but Obi's a dynamic kid, and if it again, it's like we don't know until it happens. We can all sit here and speculate, but yeah, you see enough athleticism, you see the shot improvement enough. You see that like he's a hard worker, he's continuing to work on his body, and so you want to see a progression, right? And when those things get stifled, like I think like you guys, we're just common sense, like we're looking at it from a business perspective, and then there's decisions that are made that are head scratchers, and that just feels like the last sort of, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, not just Leon and these guys. Like it's kind of how it's been.
Brad, I know you have one more question. Is it cool if I jump in and ask him something real quick?
We actually have two more, but absolutely.
BJ, I wanted to ask you because speaking of Obi, his main concern throughout his career, through Dayton and then prior and then in the NBA, is defensive progressions and making the right read, which he's definitely gotten better at. When you're scouting players, I would assume offense is easier to scout than defense, but how much is the difference, and what do you kind of look for when you're in those situations?
Well, it's two things. It's like you said. It's matchups, and then it's can he physically handle? You don't want him guarding Valanciunas
Right.
or Nurkic or one of the. Okay, so like that's part of it, but then also, yeah, reading is huge, and a lot of teams will simplify and just switch everything because it becomes so complex, and then there's so many guys coming in and out that one little mistake on a bad switch and you're giving up two or three easy ones that you wouldn't have otherwise. So is he like a tick slow in his reads? I don't know. I mean, you guys probably know better than me. I haven't like seen that or heard that. But like my thing is everybody scores. The league,
Yeah.
Sacramento's putting 130, 140. Everybody's like, so like nobody's stopping anybody, and you can nitpick on everybody's defense. There's like you could count on one hand the guys that are actual like stoppers, wing stoppers and real rim protect guys. It's just not the way the league is right now. So like if you got a guy that is starting to make threes, can get out in transition, can finish, he obviously can play defense. He could be a really good weak side rim protector. He's got the athleticism. He's got the feet for it. I don't really think that should be a huge issue holding him back. I know I'm sure it's real, and I'm sure Tibbs knows it, and that's part of the reason why he's held back. But like I said, everybody scores. So,
They're both on the same team, man. If Obi and Randall are two of your best six players, they should play 12 minutes a game together, for the love of God.
If you want to find a reason, if you're an NBA coach and you want to find a reason not to play a guy, you can find a reason not to play a guy.
Yeah.
And not everybody's LeBron in his prime. Like, everybody's not perfect. And that's why you just have to find the pieces that fit together and play well enough to win you games.
Agreed. Brad, that was it. You can keep going.
Oh, good. BJ, we got two more for you if that's cool.
No, please go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah. So this again, front office executive hat right back on. One of the biggest non-moves in Knicks history, maybe in Knicks history, in the Donovan Mitchell trade. Well, not trade. Needless to say, things did get a little bit messy. It seemed like everyone was kind of in limbo for well over 2 months, if I'm not mistaken. RJ and Evan Fournier were the names that were consistently brought up in trade rumors. RJ a little bit closer towards the end, but Evan Fournier it was like a foregone conclusion. He was gone. He was included in that deal. Both of those guys happened to start this season not playing really up to par. Evan Fournier kind of looks like a shell of himself. RJ can't hit the broadside of a barn right now from three, especially. Generally speaking, from your perspective, how personally do players take those types of trade situations, especially when maybe they actually want to be in a specific place, like stay in New York, for example?
Well, I think, look, we're all humans, and we all have sensitivities, and these guys want to be felt that they're wanted and welcomed by the organization and also the fan base. And look, they read all this stuff. The one thing in play, I mean, there's a handful of players that don't, but 95% of them do. They read this stuff. They watch you guys. Trust me, they do. And so they hear it and feel it. RJ, I think, is total speculation. I haven't spoken to the kid, and I'm not inside his head. Once you get a lot of money, sometimes, it's a ton of pressure. It's actually more pressure when you get the money, because now you're trying to live up to something, and you feel that, like, if you don't do it, you're almost in trouble. And, it's like, whereas when you're earning it, there's pressure, but it's not the same pressure. You're on a rookie contract. So if I kill it and I outplay that contract, then, that's just a different scenario. So I imagine that's some of what's going on with RJ, and I think he'll be fine. I think that, like, we've seen in his first couple of years, like, he'll have a bad first half, but then he'll have a great second half. Like, he has that resiliency gene, I think. And so I hope he'll be able to turn it around. But again, I don't need to see him shoot 10 threes. I don't want that. I want him closer to the hoop. I want him playmaking. I want him cutting and finishing in transition. I want him on the offensive glass. So hopefully that piece can be turned around. And Fournier, I don't know, man. I mean, he's been around a minute. Like, he's not an old guy, but he's not the same guy that was in Orlando. I mean, it's been a few years. And to play against the length that's on the NBA court right now, like, you have to have real foot quickness and lateral just to get your shot off consistently. And maybe there's a little bit of that, and maybe there's a little bit of, like you said, that he's involved in all these trade rumors, and all of a sudden it's like the ground underneath you isn't firm, and it's you're going out there every night knowing, like, I could shoot my way into the doghouse here pretty quickly. Look, it's the reality, and I'm not complaining about it as an agent. Like, your guys have to perform, otherwise you can't call them and be like, what are you doing? But it's a cutthroat deal, and if you don't make shots, if you're Evan Fournier, or you're RJ Barrett, or whatever it is, you're the point guard, you're turning it over, can't have it, can't win games like that.
Yeah, RJ, as we know, it has, a tendency to start off a little bit slow, right? And he's done this for 3 years now. Well, 3 years now. And we it's kind of expected of him now, unfortunately. But I think that he has the capabilities to turn it around for sure, like you said. I think that he was, after a really slow start last year, if I'm not mistaken, from like January 1st on, or something to that effect, I think he was averaging like 24, 25 points a game. So to your point, yeah, like second half of season, he really does turn the Jets on. Evan Fournier, on the other hand, I mean, the opportunities that he's gotten, he's kind of squandered. And it's just, I feel like he's just playing without any energy or emphasis on actually trying to help the team win. So that said,
well, he's also,
like,
listen, he's never been a great defender. And then,
right.
Tibbs, like, how does that sort of connection work? And then the I didn't mean to cut you off, Brad. The thing about RJ, what will be interesting, getting back to our discussion about drafting correctly, and some of the guys that went after the Knicks picked, is Garland. I mean, and what you'll start to hear is, I think, if RJ doesn't turn this around, that'll be another one where you'll look at it and go, and I know they brought in Darius like the last day before the draft just to take one more look at it. But, like, that kid's really good, and Cleveland's really good, and, like, him and Mitchell are now like a really incredible backcourt. So that's another one that you might look at again. We're like trying to figure out all this stuff of, like, what they can do strategically, but it's really just tactical in the draft. And if they had SGA and Mitchell and Halliburton and Garland and all these other guys, or Miles Bridges, obviously, who knew at the time, but, like, those types of things, you could be in a very different situation right now.
I always say we took the wrong kid from Kentucky. Oh yeah, let's take the long 6'9" project player, barely 18 years old. It'll work out. Don't worry. SGA is just absolutely murdering the league, averaging like 35 a game. He's
amazing.
unreal.
I've been watching
Unreal.
a lot, and honestly, they're a fun watch. Like Giddy's a
Oh
fun
yeah.
watch. They got. I mean, it's too bad Chet got hurt because they're like a league pass team, low key. They're fun to watch, and
Agreed.
they just drafted a couple good guys. The kid Williams is good. Like
Jalen Williams looks
yeah,
great too.
they're.
Damn.
But again, it's like so you have to get that right. If you just get that right, it's such a you have so much more momentum, you know, and more
Yeah.
than anything else, I think that's really what they should be focused on.
Yeah, for sure. You know, just to kind of put things in perspective, though, also, while yes, getting it right when you have the opportunity to get it right is 100% a necessity. But at the same time, I actually just broke this down the other day. Cleveland, since 2003, has selected inside the top 10 11 times. They've selected inside the top 5 9 times.
Yeah.
And they've won the draft lottery, as we know, 4 times in that time span. The Knicks have yet to win the first overall pick since Ewing, as we know. They've picked inside in the last 20 years. They've picked inside the top 5 twice, one of which obviously being RJ and then Kristaps Porzingis. I think they did choose inside the top 10 about 9 times, which isn't that bad. But as we can allude to, Frank Ntilikina, huge miss. Obi Toppin, not necessarily a miss, but maybe kind of like a poor draft pick considering who else is on the board. Kevin Knox, so on and so forth. With that said,
look at the guys that miss. There's so many guys that miss. By the way, I'm not singling. I'm not. Everybody misses. I mean, you mentioned Cleveland. They missed on the kid from UNLV. He was the first pick, Bennett. I mean, he was out of the league in a few years. Like, look at what David Kahn did. Look what David Kahn did. He's a good guy, but he drafted 2 point guards that weren't Steph Curry. He drafted Rubio and Johnny Flynn ahead of Steph Curry. That's why he's in France right now. You know,
New York's very own Johnny Flynn, Syracuse, baby.
Not everybody gets everything right. So It's not. I'm not trying to kill these guys. I'm just saying, if you do get it right, look at the assets you can put together.
For sure. It just goes to show, like, the Knicks haven't had the best luck in the draft, but they've also haven't had the best luck outside the draft, in the sense that, like, they really haven't been gifted in the lottery, where they haven't had a chance. I don't think they've moved up since 1985 at all, which is unheard of. I mean, it's I think, Joey, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the Knicks are the only team not to have moved up since 85. Is that right?
I believe that is true. I forgot if that's a stat, or if they've never moved up more than 2 spots. And the 2 spots, I think, was like 13 to 11 or something.
Well, they won the big one, so they're paying for that. They won the big one in '85, man, and
and they won so many titles out of that.
But you know what? Yes, no, they didn't. But what an amazing generation that was, and I have this conversation with all my guys. They're like, the younger guys are LeBron guys, and I try to talk to them about Jordan, and I try to talk to them about the physicality of the league and what a different game it was back then. And I just don't think people realize how good Ewing was on both. I mean, I don't even think coming out of Georgetown, people knew how good he was offensively, but like, not only did the guy never miss the ball, like if the rim was the size of the ball, it would still go in all the time. Like, that's how good he was with that turnaround jumper. And, so they didn't win the big one, but we had a fun time back then. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, man. So I guess let's try to close out on this one, right? And I think this is a good one to kind of close things out on too. Look at the current state of the Knicks roster. I'm sure you have a pretty good understanding of who they have and who's expendable and who you maybe want to keep around long term. We have just in 2023, right? We have our own pick. We have Dallas's top 10 protected from the Kristaps Porzingis trade, which should convey, unless Luka implodes, like physically explodes and dies. Like, and then you also have.
I hope not, man. I love watching.
Oh, God forbid, he's my favorite player.
Yeah,
he's my favorite. It's so much easier for me to root for him now that he's not playing with Kristaps Porzingis. I love that kid. Love that kid so much.
Yeah.
But then also, we're not going to get the Detroit pick, but we're we could actually get the Washington pick, which is, I think, top 14 protected. If they keep playing well and find their way into the playoffs, we could realistically have 3 picks this year. We have a few guys that are relatively expendable. You know, there's a recent rumor that Knicks may be looking to move on from Derrick Rose. Knicks may be looking to move on from Emmanuel quickly, so on and so forth. Give me your take. What do the Knicks do from here the next couple of years? Like, what would you do if you were in that position to turn this team around and actually turn it into a contender?
It's a really such a tough question. It really, and I'm gonna try to give you something here.
Here's the best part about it. There's no wrong answers.
No, there isn't, because they've tried a lot of stuff, and I think it has to be more from. It's not going to be a quick fix. You have to be honest. It's like getting back to what I was saying about with the players. You have to give an honest assessment, like you're in a doctor's office. Here are the issues. You got X, Y, and Z, and you need certain medication to get. You have to be honest about where you are and what the issues are and how you address them. And I don't know. So I'm going to answer it this way. I don't know if there's like a quick fix. Like, obviously, if they could go out and somehow get SGA in a trade market, like, yeah, they can't, because they don't have the asset. Like, they have a lot of picks. Maybe Presti. He loves the picks. Like, I don't know. Like, I think
there's one team. I'm sorry to cut you off. I think
go.
If I'm not mistaken, there's one team in the NBA that has more draft picks over the next 7 years than the New York Knicks. Take a guess who it is.
It gotta be Oklahoma City. Yeah.
So it's like, do we have anything to entice them? No, I don't think so.
Right, you know? right. Probably not. No, I just because he loves them so much. Like, maybe you could, you know, it's like Winnie the Pooh and the honey pot, you know. But like I agree with you. They don't need it. So you're not going to get that guy, right? So what do you do more from an organic, you know? Again, starting with now, how is this draft? Obviously, this kid, the number one guy, is a freak of nature and is going to be a definite game changer. Are they going to be able to win a lottery? That's luck and timing. Are they going to be able to, you know, trade up into that spot? No one's going to give it to them. So, like, they have to win it. And then everybody else after that kid, you know, I would have to take a harder look at, like, the thing is, it's not just NCAA, right? So you got to follow the G League. You got to follow the overtime situation. You know, the G League Ignite, the overtimes. Like, there's other areas where these guys are coming in from that are making up the top 5 or 10. So you have to get that right. You have to know you're going to have a bunch of picks. You have to figure out, okay, who's going to be here, who isn't, getting back to your question, right? So once I know who that is, I can fill in some pieces around it. I can target certain guys in the draft. I personally would I would look at youth. I would have a coaching staff that is aligned with cultivating and developing youth.
So Knicks.
You just hit me in the heart right here with that line.
Look, you're asking me.
No, yeah.
I think Tibbs, and look, it's kind of like I'll never get another player on the Knicks now, you know. Like, no, but I mean, like, I think Tibbs is a great NBA coach. I think Tibbs won an NBA championship in Boston that Rivers gets a lot of credit for. But if you remember that Garnett Celtic team, they were giving up 60 points a game. It was really Tibbs's defense in Boston.
And look, I mean, sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
Doc Rivers gets way too much credit, in my opinion, for that one win. To the point that you're alluding to, it had a lot more to do with Tibbs than it did Doc Rivers, in my opinion, too. Because look what Doc has done.
Chicago and then Minnesota. Yeah. So he proved that he squeezes every ounce, right? He's a great NBA coach. But if you're telling me now that the strategy is that we're going to change gears, we're going to try to trade a Randall to open up some space for Obi. We're going to try to trade whoever it is, a Fournier, to get Grimes in the mix. Now, again, remains to be seen if those guys are the right guys to go forward with. But if we're going to give them a real shot, I would look to a coaching staff that's also that I can cultivate and develop on a similar timeline, right?
Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson.
I mean, Kenny's a Long Island guy. He's a great guy. Again, I'm not here to come on here and throw Tibbs out. I'm trying to be careful, but I'm just telling you, like, some things make sense. They seem to fit together. Some things don't, right? So I would look at how do I align my coaching staff and my youth movement, identify the pieces from the youth movement, okay? And then the other thing I would do is really focus on Westchester. I mean, Westchester is right there. Is it as important as hitting on a top 10 draft pick? No. But you know what? Over the course of an 82 game season, especially now where the NBA is with guys resting and all this, you need guys that you can plug in that are sitting right up there in where are they, in Yonkers or wherever they are, that you could pull down and put into an NBA game, and this guy could give you 20. Like, Tibbs not going to do that, but trust me, those guys are there. They're in the G League. So if you get Westchester right, and you have some pieces down there that you can call on in case of emergency, and then you start to develop some of the younger assets that you currently have, I mean, that's what I want to see. The league is trying to score 125, 130 points. Like, you can't really fight that right now. You've got to get up and down. You've got to play with pace. Otherwise, you won't have enough possessions to compete. So I'm giving you a long-winded answer. You got to take a big look at the whole thing. Be honest with yourself of where you are and in terms of the East and how you're competing. And then what is my timeline for getting to a championship? I sort of see them deviating year to year. There's a shiny new object. All of a sudden, they'll change course.
Yep.
I think they don't realize that the New York fan base, if you're straight with them and you tell them honestly, guys, we're going to develop, we're going to cultivate, we're bringing in athletes, we're bringing in more speed, we're bringing in more bounce, we're bringing in these things that need to develop, bear with us. But now they got to prove they have a track record in the draft to match up to execute that strategy. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. It's more of the fundamentals of, like, how do you grow this thing from an organic lens, and less about trying to put a Band-Aid on everything always, because we're not where we need to be.
Yeah. To your point, I think that is the mindset of the front office, right? Because they've done a tremendous job in drafting, but then also they have put a major they have prioritized the draft. You know, they did a tremendous job in 2020 between Obi Toppin and Quickly.
They have assets.
2021 was a hell of a draft. I mean, we're talking the move to get the pick that ended up turning into Cam Reddish, and then that other move that turned into that eventually was used on Quentin Grimes. And then we also got Deuce McBride in that draft. We got Rokas Jokibitis, who's a hell of a kid overseas, obviously, and then Jericho Sims, who's a double machine. And then obviously, you know, we didn't really have a ton of draft capital this year. We had one pick in the first, one pick in the second. Turned the second round pick into Trevor Keels, turned that first round pick into 3. So it was a hell of a job. To your point, not the right coach for that kind of team, unfortunately. So yeah, I think making,
I don't know if BJ wants to fully establish himself to that point, but we'll take it.
Yeah. Making that necessary pivot towards actually, you know, picking a direction. And again, I think that the writing is on the wall. I think that there is a legitimate direction as per what the front office wants done. It's just a question of having the wrong coach in place. And that's just my opinion, you know?
My thing is, like, look, you look around the league, look at Utah, they brought in a young coach. Look, the Celtics lost the young coach, brought in another young coach. I mean, young coaches, look at New Orleans, look at a bunch of different spots. They're having success relating to the players, I think.
Joey.
Oh, I know.
And,
we just watched Jeff Saturday come in for the Colts and win a game without any coaching experience whatsoever. So, I mean,
when BJ's done, tell him what you said last week.
I will. Well, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, BJ.
No, that's it. And I think the other thing that I would do, there's a lot of guys in the Knick front office. And that's not to single anybody out or say that. It's just that, you know, there can be too many cooks in the kitchen. And I think that's a bad recipe. Not to throw a ridiculous pun. I think it's been that way, not just with this group, but other groups before. And I think that you'll find that the most successful front offices are more streamlined, it's clear what the hierarchy is. And it's okay to have a diverse, a multitude of voices. But once you start getting 10, 15, 20, it's impossible to come to a consensus. And then you're dealing with a lot of politics and a lot of things that, certain guys feel that you didn't take their guy. And it just, so that's another thing that I would look at as far as like strategic, what could they do to help is maybe streamline some of that.
I agree with that entirely. Brad, I'll tell him what I said once we get off the air. The last comment I'll make, and then we'll fully wrap this up and say our goodbyes, is I think of it as if you have 10 voices in your head, you have voices in your head. If you have 2 or 3 voices in your head, you have a devil and an angel. Which one would you rather actually go with? Right. BJ, you've been a great guest. Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah, I fully hope you come on again in the near future. Where can everyone find you at online?
Thank you guys. You're welcome. Thank you for that. And I'm happy to come on anytime. You can check my Twitter, I guess. It's BJ Bass 2, the number 2. Our website is RBAshowcase.com, so you can learn more about the agency and some of our players over there. But yeah, it's great. I mean, listen, and I love what you guys too. I'll give you guys a plug because, I think that this stuff and the Twitter spaces and all that, it's a great avenue for Knick fans to talk. And, we used to have WFAN but still you only really had like a couple callers every hour, and and this is like you guys getting the voice, enabling the fan base to have a voice and to interact with each other as a community is really cool. And I also think it does have an impact. I think these guys watch this stuff. They don't always do exactly what we say, but I do think they watch and they listen, and I do think they get some good ideas from it. So kudos to you guys also.
Thank you. And Brad, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Brad Dressler 24. Of course, you can find us at Big Knick Energy _ on Twitter, at Big Knick Energy on Instagram. Joey, what about you, buddy?
I am at Joey Landolfa on Twitter and Instagram, and that is it. The Knicks are going to go 3-0 this week. I don't believe it, but if I say it, it'll come true.
We need BJ in the front office. That's what we need.
Exactly.
We need his voice.
I agree entirely.
From your lips, guys. From your lips.
Guys, thank you so much. Let's go Knicks. Peace.